So welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today Enna Reittort is back, and we are going to have a conversation about spirituality and her personal experiences. And I think it will be a very interesting conversation. Of course, because we will be talking about your personal experiences, there wasn't much for me to, prepare. So today I have to wing it. With
Ah, well, I mean, in the Krivda book, there is a segment about these people who gave me this initiation, thanks to which, nearly 20 years later, I was forced to write Krivda. So, I summarized the basic principles of their path, which they call the human path, as you might remember from the book. And hello, Evie. I'm not sure she agrees with the topic of this conversation.
yeah, she got a little bit of medicine. She's still mad at me.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. She's one
Yeah.
of those animals that almost completely reject any treatment. And yeah, I get it, but it's it's a very good thing. It just has natural ingredients like bee pollen and
Oh, but they hate it. No, I know. I mean, I've all of mine. No way. No way. They wouldn't take anything, good or bad.
yeah,
So
yeah. Okay, go
yeah.
ahead.
So anyway, so these people, for anyone who's curious about them, you can go and check the word Baul, Baul, of
Yeah.
Bengal on the internet.
Oh, so they have an internet presence.
No, 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 no. There are people who've written about them.
Ah, okay.
And okay, and they are known for their songs. So there are a bunch of them who have actually become artists instead of being esoteric singers. And this is very much was very much frowned upon by the elders, for whom the songs were basically one of the major tools for transmission of the wisdom. But because, some of these guys are really fantastic musicians, and the songs were very, very popular in Bengal. So gradually there was a kind of sort of separation. And well, I mean, that's a whole different topic about, the authenticity of transmission of esoteric knowledge. So, but basically, these guys that you can find references to on the internet, and you can probably find songs, you can find groups sort of singing them. They are essentially on the so-called Hindu side. Okay, Bengal. I have to sort of, give a bit of a general framework so that we can sort of situate ourselves, because it is a completely different culture from anything in the West and from any Western understanding of Indian esoterics. So basically, Bengal was split into two by the Brits. Like they like to split countries into two,
Mhm.
don't they,
Yeah, yeah,
Judith?
yeah.
And so they did it with Bengal, more or less following a religious line, because there are many Muslims in what used to be Bengal. And so the eastern part became, it is now Bangladesh. It was East Pakistan, at the time of independence. And, most of the Hindus are on the western side within India. Now, it's those people they were discovered, in the 60s, when flower power people, hippies, started going to India and looking for gurus and all this kind of thing. Some of them went to, as far as Bengal, and they bumped into these people. And over the decades, the Hindu Baul people adapted to the Western demand in terms of spirituality. And so, after my first couple of visits there, I realized that, you know, this is not this is not I mean, I don't care about people who adapt their spirituality to me as a Westerner. That's not the point. Why the hell should I go? And so that's how I discovered that there was a much more discreet Muslim half of that movement. It's not even a community, a movement, okay? A way of being. And so I drifted towards the Muslims who call themselves Fakir. So, but if you look for Fakir of Bengal, well, you might find a couple of titles, but nothing much. They're much more, I mean, they have the same problem of having some people becoming singers and then losing the wisdom because they become famous and they become relatively rich and this, that, and the other. But, I landed in some pretty authentic places and families. And so that's where I continued for the following, nearly 10 years. And it's, as I say in the Kripta book, the remarkable thing is in this country that has millions of gods and goddesses, these people say, we don't need any gods. It's fine. My neighbors, they want to have gods. That's fine. I'm no problem, but not me. And then if I don't want any gods, I don't believe in any priests and I don't believe in any religion. And they proudly call their thing Manushar Pot, human path of the human being. So, that was kind of just that is a kind of powerful, boy, she is pissed off with you.
Yeah, she is. Enna, what brought you to India? Was it a specific project, or did you feel just like, oh, it's time to go to India?
Oh, no, 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 no. India was the last country in the world I was willing to go to.
Ah, okay.
Send me anywhere, but not India. On the other hand, I was in the process of preparing to do a thesis for a master's in, what's it called? Oh, come on. Medical anthropology, which is
Okay.
basically the anthropology of other world understandings of health and disease and what health and disease actually mean, which was absolutely fascinating. And so, there came the moment of having to write a thesis. And all my colleagues in the class were doctors and nurses. And so they could, they could write about, okay, the people next door down there, they, their understanding of madness is like this and like this. I don't have that kind of training. I figured I have to find something that has to do with something physical that I can understand and that I can deal with. And it just so happened that a friend of mine took me to a concert where these Hindu Bauls were performing. And I just, being authenticity minded, I could just feel that it was completely artificial for these guys to be doing their remarkable job in a concert hall, which is completely not what they would be doing back home. And the interesting thing was that there was a leaflet that came with the concert with a bad translation of a couple of their songs. And this bad translation said very strange things about the human body. And it so happened that this same group was organizing a 2-week kind of immersion with them in Bengal, and I signed up. And so that's how, in spite of all my misgivings about India, I ended up going to India and just falling into it. That first trip was pretty magical. And then I went back, and then I started discovering the not so magical part of their life. So there's a whole context of, over the following 10 years, the last 5 years of which I would be living full time with them. I know I was not only immersed in an esoteric tradition, but in how an esoteric tradition that has survived for centuries can survive in the modern era and is actually falling apart when globalization and the rule of money reaches into every remotest village. And so I actually experienced the last sort of flashes of authenticity and how it began to fall apart, which is why ultimately I had to leave. So,
That
but
approximately.
sorry, when was it?
When was it approximately?
I went there in 1995 and I left in 2005. So,
Okay.
I mean, it was sort of 10 years. And, out of those 10 years, I'd say that if I put all the time together, it was 7 years that I was actually in India. Because, I was still basically in the West, but in the first few years, my stays in India would become longer and longer and longer until finally I just left. So, yeah, I mean, it's, any kind of field work that you're going to go and do in remote places like that is, well, you've got, what we call the banal word of, culture shock. Well, it's way more than culture shock, this language. I had studied Bengali for 2 years, but when I went to the villages, they didn't understand me and I didn't understand them.
Uh-huh.
It's like here in Thailand. I started off learning proper Thai and having very serious conversations with my Thai teacher. But after 6 months, I still couldn't talk to the taxi driver because these countries do not have a completely unified linguistic system, exactly like it was in the West. In the West, you used to have all sorts of so-called dialects. And one day, well, somebody decided, well, we're going to have the national language, which is probably properly codified. Somebody writes up the grammar, and then we have, primary compulsory education for everybody in that language. And that's how the dialects, of course, fall apart. So anyway, here, the dialects had not yet fallen apart. And so the first 2 years, I was just going there and going and going, going back, like, like going blind, because we would have these conversations where I would catch a word once in a while, and something somehow inside me had to reconstruct some kind of meaning. And in retrospect, I can only imagine that there has to be a past life connection to the effect that, well, I mean, I am very much into the esoteric, but the natural esoteric in this lifetime. You don't develop that like overnight and just because you want to. There has to be something of it that is already there. And the fact that after 2 years, all of a sudden they said, oh, she speaks and she understands. And I didn't feel any different. But by the time they had decided that she speaks and she understands, well, there was less of a barrier from their side. So it was easier for me to not have to make so much effort. Anyway, and then very quickly, very, very quickly, I just, imbibed the main principles of this human path of theirs. And I just found it so compelling and so powerful that, well, it became my life. And, after 5 years, they were beginning to treat me like a guru, which was monstrously uncomfortable. But it happened also at the time when they were beginning to lose, because globalization was reaching into their villages. TV had completely modified the mentality of mainly the women. And that's a major problem when you have an esoteric path that is completely centered on the woman. Some people call it a tantric path, but they themselves would make fun of Tantra.
Yeah.
Because basically they are that's the other aspect. What is remarkable about this experience of mine is that I was dealing with an basically illiterate grassroots esoteric tradition. Whereas most of the people who've been with gurus and things like that, they've been in the more sort of higher caste, literate, more codified traditions of Tantra. I mean, you know, the Kashmir Tantra is absolutely remarkable. And basically, you know, it boils down to more or less the same thing, but the expression of it in the grassroots and in the upper castes is very, very different.
Mm. Mm.
So, you know,
How?
getting it from the grassroots is it's something that it has predisposed me also to understand the reality of our world and the reality of Krivda from the other end of the social spectrum. Even though I come from, you know, the same kind of middle class as, you know, and from elite kind of education, I was absolutely fascinated by the memory of illiterate people and the way they organize meaning. It's completely different from us. So, you know, I've also learned to measure the distance in terms of cognition between a highly educated mind or even a modic, you know, a slightly educated mind and a true illiterate mind that is living in a body completely surrounded and dialoguing with nature.
Mhm.
So, you know,
How
yeah,
how did you find those people? Did you seek them out, or what did somebody tell you? If you're searching for this and that, you might want to have a look at this group.
that would happen later. I mean, you know, right the first time I was there with the bunch of musicians, and I saw that the bunch of musicians were they tried to translate the songs that we were working on in this music group, and I just realized that, yeah, there was the music, the singing was just the tip of the iceberg, and that there was, you know, a massive amount of stuff behind those words that they were translating with great difficulty because it's esoteric text. So I decided, you know, okay, I'm coming back, but I'm coming back for the meaning. I'm coming back for the stuff that's behind the songs. And so I went back to the same people initially, but I stayed with them, not for the songs, but for the conversations and to see how they lived. And so they had, you know, they would have meetings, they would have festivals where everybody, you know, all the people of that kind of movement would get together and they would, you know, find fiancés and they would have these sort of singing competitions where this highly accomplished practitioner would sing a song full of esoteric riddles as a question, and somebody in the audience or in the group, the attendants, would come up with an equally esoteric riddle-filled response. And this was, you know, this was the it. I mean, it's a very, very intense form of training where it sharpens the intellect also because they were improvising with deep esoteric meanings that they were conveying in metaphors, in things, in ways that were seemingly innocent for the non-esoteric crowd who listened to these songs, but they were conveying something else. And there was a charge. There was a very powerful emotional and beyond emotional charge that it was electrifying. It was absolutely electrifying. And these people were generally what you would call higher IQ than the rest of the population. They had better morality. They were, in the old days, they used to be local elite of the illiterate people. So yeah, and from there, you meet one, you meet another one, you meet 10, and you start developing an affinity, or you start feeling that somebody is, yeah, we just start to follow your intuition. And then, so, I went, I asked one of my friends to, get me into the circle of a guru. I was that serious about it. So, this friend thought long and hard because their idea of a guru is somebody who is actually going to take charge of you as if you are their child, and more than their child, because they're going to take you on the path into the authenticity of who you truly are as a human being. So it's a huge responsibility. And normally a real guru in those circles would take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 students perhaps in a lifetime, because it wouldn't be a matter of sitting around for a few workshops once a year. No, it was an ongoing relationship for years and years and years. And so I was introduced to one old gentleman and his wife, and he was nearly 100 years old. Yeah, those people, their path also is a path of great longevity on the physical side. And so, he looked at me and oh God, am I going to do this kind of thing? I could feel him hesitating, poor soul. And he finally said yes, because he could see that I was absolutely honest and earnest and sincere, with all the difficulties, linguistic and what have you. And when I went back a few months later, he was dead. So I think he decided to leave because, I can't deal with the responsibility of, getting a foreigner onto this path. So, then I started going around, staying around people my age, people who were not the great gurus, because the official great gurus were celebrities. And I met some of them, and I instinctively, they were having the power game. They were pretty similar to, gurus that you'd see in the West. So I would hang around with mid-level initiates, which is in fact the way in which I learned a hell of a lot more, because there wasn't this huge distance between a highly initiated person and a complete beginner. And, we would have absolutely incredible conversations. And the whatever initiation was never just one thing. It was just something that was inherent in just the flow of time and the flow of activities or of non-activities. Sometimes I would show up at the village and, my favorite interlocutor was not there for a whole week, and I would have to just sit around watching the way vegetables were chopped, watching the way they took care of kids, and avoiding being sucked into the world of the women. Because the women came across for those first few years as completely not interested in the human path. So that's the other thing. During those first few years, I was just accumulating contradictions and enigma. Like, the guys were telling me, woman is the center of our path. Okay. Well, why do you hit your wife? Oh, because she does foolish things. But, she's the center of my path. How is she this? Because she's perfect. She's perfect, but you need to hit her because she does foolish things? Yes. Okay, how do you work around that? So, it would take me some years of lots of intense conversations and meetings and, going around to places where they had their great big gatherings and seeing how all that was happening before I was sufficiently immersed, I'd sufficiently soaked in the stuff that women started coming to me and wanting to have conversations with me and being terribly sad because the path wasn't happening for them. The path had been intellectually, that's another aspect of this, of the end of this tradition. The path had become, which had been a complete sort of an integral experience, body, mind, soul, and the whole subtle universe, had become split up into pieces, and the guys had kind of appropriated its intellectual content and enjoyed it terribly, because it was still full of the charge of, you know, what they had experienced from their grandfathers and grandmothers also. You know, the women in the old days, some of the greatest you know, poets of this illiterate tradition had been women, but they got overshadowed, you know, because this is against the background of the so-called Green Revolution, where these people who were mostly peasants and who were mostly, you know, doing organic by default, they were given, you know, these sacks of fertilizers and magical seeds. And for the first 2 years, they had these magical harvests that gave them piles and piles of money. Now, what does it do, you know, when you've been in an illiterate, nature-based tradition, culture for centuries, millennia, and, you know, you've only needed to deal with 10 rupees a year because you had a largely material natural economy, and okay, you needed a few rupees to go and buy salt or something like that. And all of a sudden, you're landed with 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 rupees in 1 year. Makes people go nuts. And this gave power to the guys that the women didn't have. Whereas in the past, the women were the guardians of the seeds. They knew how to select the seeds that would produce the best rice, the best this, that, and the other. They were in charge of all sorts of, you know, operations, including in the, you know, farming economy. All of a sudden, they were out. They became, you know, like late 19th century bourgeois women, stay at home, do the cooking, take care of the kids. But, you know, without whatever amusements the bourgeois women could have, because they were dirt poor. And they started getting TV and electricity 1 hour a day. And they started watching those soap operas and the adverts. And this was magic to them. And they just started, you know, wanting to live the dream life that they saw on TV.
Mm.
So, you know, I'm bringing the different aspects because, you know, what I experienced also was the, you know, the end of a living tradition. It's still there, you know, people still, you know, go to listen to their songs, but during those years that I was there, I really saw, I felt, experienced the loss. And the more aware members of that movement, you know, were saying, yes, well, you know, it's getting lost. It's getting lost. I mean, now my Muslim neighbors came to me and said, Allah is the first God, but today, no, money is the first God. So, you know, these realizations, and in a situation where you don't have what it takes to analyze this and to resist it, and even, I mean, physically, you know, is it possible for any one of us to resist unless we just go and live on our own on a desert island and live off, you know, just coconuts? No, you know, the monetary world has taken over. We're all part of it. So yeah, but I did just catch it on time to catch those fundamental principles that make this path, as they said themselves, this is a universal path. The thing is, you know, it came to me in its Bengali package against that, the backdrop of that particular culture. And so it took me a long time afterwards for it all to percolate inside me and for me to get really clear about, you know, what it really conveys.
And so did I understand that correctly? This group was, yeah, you say they have no gods, but was it Muslim based?
No.
No.
I told you that, I mean, they belong within the broader framework of the Hindus, Hindu
Okay.
mainstream and Muslim mainstream.
Mhm.
And the Baul in the Hindu mainstream and the Fakir in the Muslim mainstream.
Ah,
And
okay. No, I get
okay,
it.
sorry,
Mhm.
I'm sorry if I didn't, if I didn't make everything
Yeah, no
clear.
problem.
It's it's difficult for us Westerners to understand these things, these kind of multiplicities. And India is just layers and layers and layers of multiplicities. And the thing is, they used to get on fine with their mainstream neighbors. But occasionally there would be somebody, some big shot in the local mosque or some politician who would start a campaign of, oh, those horrible Baul or those bad Fakir. They are poisoning the waters, doing the kind of scapegoating thing. And then they would be persecuted like crazy. So, yeah, they had lots of persecutions because they were different. And that's another reason why they kept their wisdom secret. Not so much, behind a locked door, but coded into their songs. Because, one of the fundamental things about these people is that they are what we would call materialist. But for them, materialist means that there is no separation between matter, energy, and the subtle, whatever forces. It's
Hmm.
all one thing. And
Hmm.
for us, emotions, thoughts, they are matter no less than the physicality of our bodies. It's just one reality with its different layers, or they don't even use the word layers. And so that's pretty powerful because that's one of the elements of religion. Religion is going to separate the physical and the spiritual. The body has to suffer for the soul to be saved, kind of thing. No, for them, it's all one thing. And the other thing is that you have to learn to be your own experiencer, teacher. You have to navigate your own relationships between the physical that is easier to perceive and the emotions and the subtle flows that animate this whole thing. And the role of your teacher, your guru, is to get you there. And that's
Hmm.
it. It's fundamentally very, very, very simple. But for us Westerners, with our, there's this wall between the physical and the spiritual. And, this is terrible. This is a terrible materialist. No, it's a consumerist society. It's
Hmm.
not, blaming matter, blaming materialism, as if materialism is an ism anyway.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, it's just all mindfuck confusion. But if you consider that it's all part of one same large reality, and that you can explore, if you are sensitive to subtle things, you can explore the subtle and the way in which it manifests in the physical. If you are going from the body, you're going to start working from the body, and that's what most of their gurus do, because that's how most of people operate. But how does your body work together with some of your certain emotions? And so, there are key emotions like anger, greed, and the other end of the spectrum is love. But there again, love has all sorts of different nuances. And I suppose tenderness, this caring, and how these inhabit the female and the male differently. Yes, that's the other big thing. For these people, we're talking of a caste system in India, right? It's a caste system. These people say there are no castes.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And caste, what the British translated as caste is the word jati, which means birth, species. And a derivative of that is going to be caste.
Hmm.
But there is only two jati, according to them, and I think they're pretty correct, which is that it's male and it's female. And they don't give a shit whether it's white female, black female, pink male, yellow male. It doesn't matter. There's just those two jati. And the whole game of life is how these two jati work together so that the human can come into the full experience of its reality, and to refine the the lesser emotions, the lesser habits, to get out of habits, to get out of stupidity, to get out of conformity, to get out of all the things that afflict the mainstream, and to become the, I suppose, perfected being that you can be, your integral being, to become the whole human. And that's, it doesn't sound as lofty as achieving enlightenment, but becoming a whole human being is, there aren't many of us.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Have you been able to figure out, I mean, to me as a Westerner, it's pretty outstanding, in a culture where you have so many gods and goddesses, there pops up a group that says, to hell with it, we don't need it, and we are trying a different way. Have you been able to trace where that came from?
Well, that's the difficult thing, because we're talking of an illiterate tradition. So the thing is, the other aspect is that, documentation, chronicles, archives, you start getting them more or less reliably in the 15th, 16th century from Arab and Chinese travelers and merchants. And they were saying at the time that Bengal was a land of plenty. It was paradise on earth, and all the women are so beautiful. And it's true. I mean, Bengal is the delta of the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, bringing in all that, fertilized silt from the mountains. They could do 3 harvests of rice a year without having to do, all you had to do is put the seeds in the ground. And then, when the British came, they made Calcutta their headquarters. And they especially enslaved the Bengalis. The opium plantations that would work, with the triangular trade with China, that was for the Bengalis. The indigo slaves. I mean, it was okay. You've got this land of plenty that is colonized by these ruthless, whatever, Brits. But so there is a trace of them in a couple of 16th century chronicles that refer to the fact that everybody in Bengal had fallen in love so much, because ultimately this is a path of love, but not ordinary love. Everybody had fallen in love so much. They were all going around in such blissful inner joy that nobody was willing to work anymore. So this was before the colonial era. Still, the Sultan or the Raja of Bengal, I mean, still needed his subjects to work, so that he could get some taxes and things like that. And so it became a problem. So there's that mention. And then there's very, very little, there are people of other traditions, the more educated, higher caste, etc., who came across these Baul and Fakir people and saw some similarities. The fundamental doctrines, or not doctrines, principles, are shared with, Indian Sufism, with Tantra, with bits of Buddhism. This is completely syncretic. And there was a whole wave in the 15th, 16th century. There was a wave of this kind of esoteric poetry in the lower castes across the whole of the north of India. And so, there's that continuity, which comes from way, way before. Way, way before. How far before, I don't know. But there is something also that is reminiscent of a flavor of what we have with the Gnostics.
Mm-hmm.
I have not studied, that aspect. I just say that sort of intuitively. But it seems to me that across the whole of the Eurasian continent, there was a certain continuity of wisdom seeking that would take different flavors depending on, whatever bigger dominant religion was there in the framework, and depending on local places. In the fakir in West Bengal and in Bangladesh, we're very close to the Sufi people who came, from the 15th, 16th century on, and they are the ones who brought Islam to Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia was not Islamified by mainstream Islam, but by Sufi people. And these Sufi people, they settled here and there, and they merged with the local life. They might take a local wife, and they brought their ideas from Central Asia and from Persia and from, Mesopotamia. They brought those ideas from that civilization, and they taught some things to the local people. And they very much obviously enjoyed the more natural way of the local people. And so, it was a very fruitful mix. And all over the Bangladeshi countryside and also in West Bengal, every other village has the grave of a, Sufi saint, but a saint in terms of being a proper human being, a friend of the people, not a saint like in the Christian thing. And they're just part of the landscape. So it's, this esoteric thing is part of a whole continuity where there, again, in India, the borderline between the esoteric and the exoteric is very porous, very, very porous. You're going to have people who are completely mainstream Hindu, and they, will suddenly come up with something that, if you are attuned to esoteric things, okay, it's the esoteric pops up all the time in the exoteric. So it's all part of a kind of fluid, was part of a fluid continuity. I mean, now with differentiation of people thanks to how much money they make and how much, if their son works in the IT industry and things like that, no, that kind of thing doesn't work any longer. But yeah, and the other thing is these people at the village level, because they did so much work on themselves, as we would say it in the West, and they had these discussions, for hours on end. So they developed an ability to think critically, different from the Western thinking critically, that made them very intelligent. And very often they would be, the local elites. They would be called upon to solve disputes. Some of them would be healers. They knew all the herbs of the neighborhood. Don't you? You have to. This is my look. Can you see what this is?
Yeah, it's a chicken.
It's a chicken. She sits here day in and day out, and she doesn't have eggs under her. She insists on, doing my work with me.
Yeah, our chickens do that as well. They sometimes enter my landlord's house when they
okay.
are on the terrace,
Sure.
and then they walk into the house. Yeah.
Oh yes, mine walk all over the place. They run, they jump, they wait. There's nothing is off limits to them. But this one, I mean, sitting next to me, because most of them are pretty wild.
Yeah.
She's right next to me, and occasionally she will, she'll give me, there's the sharp peck when they're telling you
Yeah.
off. That's one thing, but she'll give me tiny little pecks, like little kisses. Anyway, so I mean, this is part of the esoteric of the human path.
In our email exchange before we did this interview, you said something along the lines of that the Western concept of spirituality does not work.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Well, okay. Now we've already sort of mentioned the fact that the West has a problem with the divorce between matter and spirit. Okay. So, whenever I hear the word spirituality in the Western context, my fakir mind says they have a problem with that. They haven't been able to reconcile spirit and matter. So, in spirituality in the West is okay. It's in the religious context where you have to save your soul from all the sinful stuff down here, or in the New Age, or in even in very good Buddhist what have you circles. It's about transcending the physical. There is this implicit or explicit hierarchy whereby the physical is less worthy than the spiritual. But then why the hell would the physical exist? I mean, why do animals exist only for us to kill them and eat them because they are lesser beings than us? Is the earth less worthy than the sky because it's dirt and dirty? I mean, we've got all these dualities, which they're basically racist. They're introducing a kind of racism within existence, within the totality of reality. And in fact, they imprison us in a sense of everything that is sinful. And consequently, they make us want to be getting out of this sinfulness and finding redemption. And then again, we're given different kinds of saviors to redeem us. It's all part of the same paradigm. So, and the other funny thing is, we talk of spirituality and it has to do with matters of the soul. Then why don't we have the word soluality? And the same in, the Roman languages. Anima. It's not my animitude, it's my spiritualité. So, and then we also know that there are good spirits and evil spirits, and spirits are also in booze. So there's a whole sort of magma of stuff that has to do with, I think, false duality. And there again, my beloved Fakir, with their notion that everything is matter, everything is real, basically, everything is reality. And it's up to us to sort out these realities so that we can refine our ability to bring in the subtle, more and more of the subtle that is already there, to make it more active in our physicality. And that is how our physicality can further reveal the miracle of manifestation. Because, I mean, the business of creating, generating, evolving nature, bodies, be it an insect all the way to a human, the extraordinary architecture and all the functionalities and all the communication that happens within these physicalities has taken a hell of a lot of work, so to speak, for the different levels of subtle energy to be able to produce. And so, if you consider how much it takes to produce manifestation as physicality, well, then perhaps physicality is worth as much respect as spirituality, but as a continuum with spirituality, not separate. Without the spirit, the soul, the subtle everything, these bodies would not be working. They would not be having this experience. They would not be trying to find out what is their life mission and then trying to implement their life mission to make, if the subtle forces out there have gone to such trouble for me to be able to live in this particular body, there has to be a good reason for it. It isn't just for me to want to escape out of this body, to go into the world of spirituality and to be a pure soul. Souls can't do the stuff that we can do here. So that's why, overall, I don't have a specific small problem with the word spirituality. The problem is with the implicit distinction that it makes from materiality, whereas there would be no materiality with it without the spirit, all this subtle stuff working inside matter to reveal what the spiritual stuff can do. The subtle, there again, we don't have the right words for all those things.
Yeah, I would agree that I see sometimes, this distinction, spirituality good, body bad.
Yeah.
And it has all these very, very negative outcomes. Some people start totally neglecting their body, not taking good care of themselves, and that doesn't make sense at all.
Well, it makes sense if they think that this body is a piece of, rotting meat, and they need to save themselves, out there in the clouds, with, I don't know, God the Father or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And what are they going to do? Once you're dead, what does your soul do? The thing that we call soul, I don't even, know that. There again, we've got word problems, but that subtle, the subtle part of thing that animates us and takes us through one life after the other. And what are we going to do out there? We're going to be singing in the, God's choir 24 hours a day when there are no days and no nights. I mean, yeah. I mean, if we want to be clear about the nature of matter, we need to explore much more about how the subtle animates the material. And I mean, that is just so very, very, very interesting. And the revelations that you can get, I've been writing the odd post on my Substack about my magical relationship with my favorite tree. And, I wouldn't say every day, but every week, there's a new stage of something happening at a subtle level that is going to put electricity in my foot, or is going to make me tremble, or I'm going to feel. That's one of the things that we are here to do, which my tree has taught me, is that we are literally connectors between the core of the earth and way up there. Well, I mean, to me, that's a very spiritual thing that is completely embodied. And it's fun. It's joyful. And I don't have to sit for, 10 hours on a cushion to get to that point. I just need to be with my big tree and be,
Yeah. When you talked about discussions that they had, I was reminded a little bit. There are certain Buddhist schools where you have to defend a point of view that you actually do not hold.
Right.
You know, and then your counterpart has to do the opposite, some point of view that you probably hold, and he doesn't. And then and I think things like that are useful.
Oh, sure. But that, Judith, that there was always a tradition of religious debate in the West and in the East, always. And, that kind of debate was also how certain kings would choose which religion they would, adopt, which religion they would adopt for their people, whether their people liked it or not. But this debate was, and it would continue for hours on end. Now, the Buddhist thing that you're mentioning, Buddhism there is a tendency in the kind of Buddhism that we are aware of in the West to develop the mind.
Yeah.
To make the mind very flexible. And that's, the kind of thing that you're talking about. And to also cultivate non-attachment. Very, very useful. Very, very useful. On the other hand, what I find in a lot of, Buddhism is, and why has it been so attractive in the West, is that intellectual aspect of it. Whereas, you've got experiential Buddhism, just meditative, which there are statues of the Buddha in Laos. Laos is very much a sweet country of sweet people living in the lap of nature. And the flavor of Buddhism there, in these old statues, where you've got, there's one, I'd have to find this picture and send it to you. There's this Buddha who's not really clean shaven, and he's got this slight smile, but it's not the, the inner smile of that sort of gaze into the third eye. He's got this smile of a happy human. And you can see he's happily embodied. And his meditation does not separate him from reality around him. He's obviously enjoying the flavor of being fully right there, So, Laotian Buddhism has, as far as I know, not generated any great sort of literary tradition of mind searching. It's much more purely experiential. So, you've got there's different shades of Buddhism also. And in the West, basically, we know the more, that part that is more pleasing to the Western mind, to the.
This was the public hour. For full access of the entire interview, please join our Patreon community. Thank you.